listening to the Full Court Press with your host, Drew Duncan. Don't you dare touch that dial. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Full Court Press. I am your host, Drew Duncan. Don't forget, I am on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at DrewDuncan83. Additionally, you can find me on YouTube as Drew Duncan. Been telling you guys a couple of days now. Been really looking forward to having one Tony-Cutillo right here on the Full Court Press. You've seen him and heard him on ESPN, Fox Sports, and he is a football insider for the Philadelphia Eagles. Tony, thank you so much for coming on and talking a little football with us today.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
You know, I start thinking about football in a general sense, and I think to myself about the dominance of the New England-Patriots, the Alabama Crimson Tide. They're always going against these guys that are great teams, but they're considered to be underdogs. Is this good or bad for sports that Philly, being the best team in the NFL throughout the year, is still the underdog going into this game?
I guess it depends on who you talk to. Honestly, the Philadelphia Eagles are obviously feeding off this underdog mentality because it's been getting so many national headlines. But, for the NFL, I think it's always good when you have, the little guy that rise up against David Goliath story, gives them a storyline, gives them things to talk about. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing at all. And if the little guy wins, it's even a bigger story. So it's even better for NFL.
The Philadelphia Eagles came into this postseason still with the number one seed. They were underdogs to the Minnesota Vikings. They were underdogs on their own home turf, and yet we see them rise to the occasion. A big part of it, though, I think has been defensively. But why doesn't anybody want to talk about that with Philly?
You know what? I think because this whole season was so synonymous and so, pressed about Carson-Wentz and all being about 11, and we all know that in Philadelphia there was so much adversity even before the defense started the ball with, the numerous injuries with the head coach issues and things of that nature. But the defense kind of got undermined a little bit because when we came into the season, it was all about we had no cornerbacks. The linebacking crew was kind of weak, and it was just all about the defensive line. But Jim Schwartz really cemented himself probably as a future head coach, which I think he could be in Arizona. Who knows? But especially with only giving up 10 points to the Falcons and 7 points to the Vikings. In 2 weeks and 2 playoff games, that's pretty extraordinary.
Is Nick Foles an underrated quarterback, or is he right about where everybody says he is?
Nah, he is who he is. He really is. And I've said this numerous times. Nick Foles is a guy, he's not a franchise quarterback. He'll never be a franchise quarterback. He's a guy who is a prototypical backup. He's going to win you a couple games. He's going to keep you in games, and that's what you do when you sign a guy. You don't expect him to start the whole season. Unfortunately, injuries happen. But, yeah, Nick is who he is. He played above his head. He dialed it back last week to, I like to say, to chip Bill to the 27-2 era. He really did, and he needs one more. And can he do it? Yes, he most certainly can. Doesn't mean you need to pay him as a franchise quarterback, though.
The Andy Reid effect is still being felt with the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, in Doug-Pederson, one of his proteges was looked to even be the guy at quarterback until they decided to draft Donovan McNabb. What is it about a Pederson and a Reid that separates those guys from other coaches in the league?
Well, Pederson, I specifically was on record saying he was basically an Andy Reid clone, which everybody knows because he comes from that Andy Reid tree, which is a very, very extraordinary tree, by the way. But the one thing I think the difference between Doug and Andy is, they both had the mindset of protect the player, be a family. We don't throw guys under the bus. We stick up for our guys, whether it be in the locker room or on a national level. But I think Pederson expects more out of his guys than Andy did. And I think you're seeing that in Kansas City right now. So I think that's the one difference from Doug, which is a trait I don't think any of us, whether it be locally or nationally, really gave him a shot or understanding he actually had. So hats off to him for that.
Is it really not talked about enough, the coaching job that Pederson has done with the Eagles? One of the things that I've alluded to several times is A coach is a PR guy. He's a recruiter. He's a brother, an uncle. The amount of work that he constantly has to do, and that's all just besides being an actual football coach. And you just kind of alluded to it a little bit there. Can we go in more in depth about what Doug-Pederson really means to the Philadelphia Eagles?
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, this is a team, a city, a fan base, an organization that was really gutted by Chip Kelly. I mean, let's face it. I mean, hats off. I still think Chip will come back in the NFL one day. He's a brilliant football mind. He just didn't know, he wasn't mature enough to be able to handle the ego of a professional football player. That being said, this organization needs to find somebody. And let's face it, Doug was the fourth option. Okay, he was the fourth option, but he is a guy we picked. And I think it's underrated the amount of professionalism, the amount of aggression that he's actually promoted, and the actual positive light he's actually brought back for the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, this is a team, okay, that was gutted from their younger players that couldn't, they couldn't get a draft pick right. Let's face it. We had guys like Nelson Aguilar who couldn't catch a cold last year, who we thought he had a mental lapse. Guys like, right? I mean, we had guys like Brandon Brooks, who we were talking about could be the next Sean Andrews. Okay, and he's actually reinvented these guys into the talent and players that they actually are, which in my money is Coach of the Year material.
A lot of people are going to get into this 2004 Super Bowl with the Eagles and Patriots. I feel like we're looking at two completely different football teams. Obviously, Donovan McNabb, a much more athletic quarterback, but as many people would remember at the end of that game, 2 minutes to go, couldn't get it done. He's puking. He's nervous. I mean, he was just pointing, trying to get those guys downfield, couldn't get it done. What is the primary difference that you see between the 04 matchup and this matchup going in a week and a half?
Well, the interesting part about it is if you look back, that 2014 for the Patriots it wasn't a prolific team. It wasn't an unbelievable team. I mean, their number one receiver was David Givens, Deion Branch. I mean, these aren't Pro Bowl perennial players. So actually, the Eagles team should have won that game, but it didn't. So we were fast forward into 2017 or 18, whatever one you want to call it. But, obviously Nick Foles is not Donovan McNabb, but it's almost the same particular team for New England. But the difference this year, I think it's going to be the Philadelphia Eagles offense against the New England defense. Because let's face it, the GOAT is Tom Brady. You're not going to stop Tom Brady. Maybe you can hope to contain him. You hit him in the mouth a little bit. But the whole chess match is going to be Nick Foles and Doug-Pederson against Matt Patricia. And the defense that's not actually a Pro Bowl defense for New England Patriots. So I think they can be beaten that way.
Amazing to me to think about that 04 Pats team. Corey Dillon had such a great regular season, was non-existent, particularly in the playoffs when they needed him most. What about this run game for Philly this year, the 1-2 combination between Blount and Ajayi? Do you think that maybe the Philadelphia Eagles can play control the clock game against the New England Patriots?
It's funny you say that because it's actually going to add Corey Clement in there, who made a tremendous play. Here's another credence to Doug-Pederson. Here's an undrafted guy who's come in and actually been integral into their Super Bowl run. But, to control the clock, you're right. The one thing that we could do that, if we can get up in a lead, maybe we can control the clock because we do have the horses in Ajayi and Blount to be able to do it. And again, another Doug-Pederson thing. Here's two guys who essentially could be a number one back on any other team in the NFL that needs one. And these are two unselfish guys who are willing to take on the role as the brotherhood, as a team in order to be successful. So, really, really good way to, move forward going towards the Super Bowl.
We're talking to Tony-Cutillo, Philadelphia Eagles insider right here on the Full Court Press. I am your host, Drew-Duncan. Tony, when I start thinking about the Philadelphia Eagles season, where they were a couple of years ago to where they are now, why is it we see some of these teams turn around in the NFL and we call it parity in college football, but in the NFL, it's almost like we're upset to see the unusual suspects in. Do you think that's kind of what's going on with Philly?
Actually, I think it's on the other end. I mean, like we said earlier, I mean, there was such a power struggle within that organization between Chip Kelly, Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman, and, now you're seeing Howie step up, and, they hired Joe Douglas, who had so many prolific years with the Baltimore Ravens as one of their big-time scouts, and you're seeing that on the field. But I think the difference is in parity, you mentioned about parity. I mean, I don't understand. You probably don't understand. It's unexplainable why those teams like the Cleveland Browns consistently go 0-16 or, 1-15 and they still can't find their mark. I mean, maybe this is actually the time for them. I'm not sure, but I think because you're always going to have teams like that, the Indianapolis Colts, who eventually one day maybe will actually sign an offensive lineman that they haven't had in 10 years. I mean, these are the same things that me and you could point out. We don't understand why other executives can't point out. So I think that's the frustration sets in from NFL fans saying, why are these guys always at the bottom? And you always have teams like New England and Pittsburgh and now Philly at the top. So I think that's where some of the frustration stems from.
I start thinking about this football game, and for me, the biggest aspect is going to be who controls the line of scrimmage. And I think about Fletcher Cox with the Philadelphia Eagles. We don't talk about him enough, though. We talk about other guys in the league all the time, Donovan Sue and, Dwight Freeney, but yet Fletcher Cox is a guy who's probably better than any defensive lineman in the NFL right now. Why isn't he being spoken of?
I don't know, maybe his last name, people are afraid to touch it or not, but honestly, he does get some recognition a lot. If you listen to the national games, he is the one guy that they've revolved their defensive game plan around. He's the one guy they always mention. But I think, this team, it has such a brotherhood about them, and because I think there were so many things coming into the season. I mean, you talk about they lose a guy like Jordan Hicks as a middle linebacker. So the first thing you want to do is touch on, how their linebackers have excelled even without, the perennial Pro Bowler. This defensive backfield that's led by the Pro Bowler Malcolm Jenkins, a guy who has been, a poor man's Brian Dawkins, so to speak, for the Philadelphia Eagles, but other guys around him that may not be as great that actually have to play up to his standards. So I think a lot of those things overshadow Fletcher Cox, but I do think he's getting the recognition now, and it will just keep getting greater, especially during the Super Bowl.
Tony, one more question for you before I let you go. I know you're a busy man and have a lot to do. Are you kind of tired of starting to hear the fan narrative of, see, it wasn't really Carson Wentz, it was the Eagles team all along? Or do you kind of take that side that, well, there was a big part of that, and even though Carson Wentz was great, obviously we see just how good this team really is?
It's funny because I was a firm believer, even as a Philadelphia guy. I wasn't a big Doug-Pederson supporter, and I constantly said that, maybe it's not Nick-Foles who's bad. Maybe it's not Doug-Pederson who's good. Maybe it's just Carson Wentz who's that much greater. Maybe he's calling his own game plan and Doug really can't call plays. But I think the narrative that you keep hearing, and I think it's more on a local level, obviously, than a national level, is you'll hear some nitwits out there and say, you know what, we can win with anybody. Listen, Carson Wentz is the number one youngest, most prolific quarterback the NFL has seen since Andrew Luck came out and was healthy. He is who he is. So yes, listen, the Philadelphia Eagles are a 5.5 underdog for a reason because nobody sold on the team, and that's fine. That's okay. You're supposed to feel that way. If me or you were a betting man, would you bet Nick-Foles against Tom Brady? Probably not. But as a fanboy, as a guy who pleads green, I'm putting the house on him. So there's a different perspective on both sides. So I get it. I understand it. I'm not going to worry about it because after the Super Bowl, it's all going to be about Carson Wentz again anyway. So, fly, Eagles, fly.
You've been listening to Tony-Cutillo right here on the Full Court Press. I am Drew Duncan, Tony, as I do with all of my guests, and you are no exception to the rule, sir. I give everybody a couple of moments to have the floor. What is ever on your mind, social media information, whatever you want to say, it's all you right now, guy.
And again, I appreciate you having me, and anybody listening out there, all I'm saying, you can follow me as always at tcutillo23. I work for, exclusively for phillyinfluencer.com. We do a lot of work on that website. Check us out. And also my own show called The Heat Ratio, brought to you by wildfireradio.com. Just recording an episode again. It's live every Wednesday from 12 to 1. So again, please come check me out.
There you have it, Tony-Cutillo. Thank you so much for being on the program. Very good takes. This is the Full Court Press. I am Drew Duncan. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram is all at DrewDuncan83. We'll be back right after this. Don't you dare touch that dial.